Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Technicolor Gutz, but you can just call me Gutz. Today I'm going to be talking a bit about my experience growing up as the quote-unquote weird girl while I draw some of my favorite weird girls. The first weird girl I'm drawing here is Sasha from the French-Canadian movie Humanist Vampire Seeking Consenting Suicidal Person, and if you haven't watched it, I highly recommend it. It's a darkly humorous coming-of-age film about a young vampire girl who just can't bring herself to kill because of her sympathy for humans. One of the lines from the movie that really stuck with me was when Sasha's father says about her, she would have empathy for a rock. Hyperempathy, as you may or may not know, is a common trait among autistic women and girls, and I certainly experienced that throughout my life. I always felt very deeply for other people, animals, and even inanimate objects. I remember one time on a road trip, I accidentally left behind a beloved stuffed animal at a gas station. Once I realized, I sobbed and begged for us to go back for him. We didn't. I imagined how lonely and left behind he must feel, and I just remember being so absolutely devastated about leaving him behind that, to be honest, it still makes me like a little bit sad to this day to remember how absolutely destroyed little me was about this. Um, I was like very forgetful, so I left stuff behind a lot, and this was not the first like meltdown I had over leaving behind what I considered to be a beloved toy. Um, and some of them were just like little cheap plastic things from like Kinder Surprise eggs. So you know that ability to like really humanize inanimate objects and feel a really strong empathy for them and also for other people and animals was an autistic trait that I felt was really represented in this movie and that I obviously very strongly relate to. Um, I'm gonna talk a little bit about like my experience growing up as I finish up this speed paint of her. I wouldn't say that I knew I was different from a young age, but I did notice from a young age that other people kind of regarded me as different, and I was very socially alienated by my peers. As a kid, I was super, super outgoing, friendly, and talkative, and I didn't understand why everybody disliked me so much, despite the fact that, at least I thought, I was pretty nice. I experienced a lot of bullying and alienation as a kid, and I could never figure out what was wrong with me or why everyone else thought I was so different. Um, well, I was, when I was really young, like really, really outgoing, and I loved talking to people and meeting new people. The more kind of like rejection that I faced from people, the more I really found an escape in like these kind of fantasy worlds. I was always a big reader and a huge bookworm. And I was reading like almost all the time, especially as I started to struggle with socializing. And I was very, very drawn to like fantasy and horror and adjacent genres. And I always found myself heavily relating to the characters in these stories that were kind of outcasted and treated differently, particularly like the non human characters. I think because of my like big imagination and my love of reading when I was younger, I was absolutely convinced that I would find out one day that the reason everyone seemed to think I was so different was because I was actually like not a human being. Um, and I thought I would find out one day that I was actually like a vampire or a werewolf or an alien or something, you know, one of those classic like kid, like, I don't know, like escapism fantasies. But I would later find out that the reason I felt so different and related to these characters in that way, it was autism. And as a result, you know, many of those characters kind of were actually written to represent people like me, just not in exactly the way I thought as a kid. The thumbnail was referencing the fact that TikTok seems to have made being like a weird girl into something of a trend. And honestly, I don't have much to say about that other than it's just another one of those trends that's going to like pop up and then be gone again in the blink of an eye due to this ever quickening trend cycle that social media facilitates. It might already be dead by the time of this video, to be honest. I don't know. Also, I feel like you can always tell when someone is faking being a quote-unquote weird girl. A weird girl poser, if you will. Not to talk about it like it's some kind of status symbol or something, but it's strange to see the thing that you were bullied for your whole life suddenly become trendy. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, shouldn't you be happy that it's now trendy and you won't get made fun of anymore? And my answer is no, because as with many things that trend on TikTok, being weird is only considered socially acceptable if you're thin and conventionally attractive and neurotypical, or if you can pass as such. So a lot of my fellow weird girls are still being bullied and alienated for the very thing that's supposedly cool and trendy. Like, as we all know, the concept of cringe culture has been having big ups on the internet in the past couple years, and so many people on TikTok, and I'm sure also on YouTube, have based their whole brand and all their content around just making fun of people for having weird or unusual interests, like for being alternative or for being into cosplay or being into anime or being furries or whatever. So, you know, it's kind of interesting to see that amidst the rise of this, like, being a weird girl is, like, cool now, and, you know, people are recommending all these, like, weird girl movies. It's weird that amidst all of that, people are still getting bullied on such a big scale for being weird. The second weird girl I'm drawing here is Lily from Sex Education, and I was so excited to draw her and talk about her because she is so dear to my heart. I haven't drawn her before, and I usually draw characters that have a little more of like a dark fashion sense, so it was a really fun like departure from what I usually do. Her fashion sense is eccentric and bold. She's a little reserved, but so unapologetically herself. She is sort of unaware of her own strangeness, and she's queer in many senses of the word. She reminds me a lot of myself when I was much younger, before the world taught me to be ashamed of everything about me. At the same time, I aspire to be more like her, or more like a younger me, unapologetically strange and unafraid to be myself. Watching her navigate her own identity and queerness really endeared her to me. I related to her a lot in the sense that I think growing up queer and autistic, I knew I was queer from a pretty young age, and my first relationship when I was 13 was a queer relationship, And so I think, unlike many other queer people, the structure and expectations of heteronormativity didn't get imposed on me so much. I don't think I've really ever felt pressure to fall into or try to replicate heterosexual norms in my relationships. And I definitely see that reflected in the way Lily navigates herself and her relationships throughout the show. We're moving on to the final weird girl, Tara from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. She's also very near and dear to my heart, and I see in her a facet of growing up queer that unfortunately I think many queer people will relate to. Feeling like you're somehow inherently gross or wrong for experiencing queer feelings. And quick disclaimer, I am going to be talking about internalized homophobia for this last section, so if you're not in a place mentally to hear that, you can either skip ahead to see the finished artwork or click off of this video now. So I didn't grow up religious, but the impact of growing up in a society that is so heavily influenced by Christianity is that even if you don't grow up in the church, I think we often still find ourselves being influenced by it. I believe that a lot of the feelings that queer people experience about their attraction to others being gross or wrong is rooted in certain religious groups or individuals claiming that being queer is immoral or a sin. Even if you don't personally ascribe to those beliefs, certain individuals will still try to push those ideas on you. So, unfortunately, in Western society, I believe a lot of us are impacted by this. Another feeling that's followed me very prevalently throughout my life is feeling that my attraction to women and other queer people is somehow predatory and objectifying. Not only has this narrative been pushed by homophobes for decades, but I believe that because the only examples we really see of attraction to women are from straight men, that lesbians, queer women, anyone who considers themselves adjacent to that, believe that their attraction must be operating in the same way, if that makes sense. And to be clear, I don't at all think that literally all men are inherently predatory in their attraction to women, nor do I think that queer attraction is inherently more pure or that it can't also be predatory and objectifying. However, I do think that our current society, the patriarchy and porn culture does strongly influence many men to see women as objects rather than whole people. And I just think that by and large, queer people, particularly queer women and people who consider themselves kind of adjacent to that group, are not affected by that in the same way because they themselves are also victims of that. Like, I often found myself extremely frustrated and enraged by the way I was objectified by men, and so I felt guilty because I assumed my attraction to women and other queer people was operating the same way, and I was in turn making them feel uncomfortable and objectified. Luckily, I was able to do a lot of unpacking and unlearning, and that feeling has, for the most part, gone away because, well, I know that I see people as whole people and not objects. Like, I don't know, it's not hard. But I do remember being in the locker room in phys ed in high school, you know, that wonderful time where they thought let's put a whole bunch of insecure hormonal teenagers in a room and make them get half naked together. And I would always stand in a corner, like facing the corner, Blair Witch style. Everyone probably thought I was so weird, but I was so paranoid about being seen as predatory or accidentally making people uncomfortable that I kept my eyes glued to that corner. And don't get me wrong, it's not like if I was facing everyone else, I would be, like, ogling them like a creep. Like, you know, I don't think I would have a hard time just, like, averting my gaze and being respectful, but I was just, like, so entrenched in the internalized homophobia that I was petrified of accidentally being predatory. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Thanks, bye!